And it sounds like you used a lot of the technology that was emerging, the internet and e-commerce, to really rewire the back end. Can you talk us through how you went about doing that? Was it speed? Was it just being closer to the customer? Maybe talk us through that.
Yeah.
Data, data,
Mm,
data,
mm,
data. I mean,
right.
businesses run off of data, off of knowledge. And when you don't have data, it's
Mm,
like, as you can see from all the stuff in the background, I'm an
mm,
aviation nut. And you can't fly in the clouds in bad weather without
mm,
data. So you rely heavily on the information
mm.
coming from your instruments to stay
Yeah.
on course and alive, basically. And
Mm,
retail's the same thing. You've got to know what's selling. You've got to know what's not selling and how to stay in stock on the best selling items. So
right.
it was really back to fundamentals, but data allowed us to be better retailers. Now I'll give you an interesting story though. You see a lot of retailers adopt technology. And the most common mistake I see with fellow retailers in technology is that they think technology is a way to take the people out of
Mm,
retail, of decision making. The irony is what I saw as the success of 7-Eleven Japan was that instead of taking the decision making out, so in other words, the computer can tell you how many pieces of one particular kind of sushi you need to order for the next day. There's a tendency to allow that computer to make the decision. The problem with that is that a retailer has eyes and ears. The computer doesn't. The
mm,
retailer looks out his window and says, the road's under construction. It would take the computer 2 weeks to realize that.
mm, mm.
The retailer can then make an immediate judgment based on data that says, here's how many units I need to order for tomorrow. So it's basically using technology to enable the retailer, the person, to
Mm.
be a better retailer. And that's the secret sauce that made 7-Eleven Japan so successful.
Going back to retail is one of the hardest games out there in any segment. And you've been, one of the few CEOs I've had on the show that has been successful at scale. I think I had the former president of Starbucks on, and he talked about, growing the brand across Asia and, what kind of things you had to adapt to, different cultures and so forth. 7-Eleven, I didn't even realize how many stores and footprint you guys had. You took it across 19 countries. Very impressive. I'm guessing that the psychology of the customer in some of those non-North American countries may not be the same as Middle America. So how important was understanding your local demographic, and how did you, execute on that?
So, Jerome, I call it. I've adopted a phrase I call cultural literacy, and
Mm,
it's interesting because in today's world, as you know, there's a lot of angst around
mm,
diversity and
mm.
DEI and all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff, right? And it's kind of comical because from my perspective, because I've used cultural literacy very successful on a global basis because the reality is technology is never going to go away, right? So
Hmm.
the world is going to continue to shrink, and the more we
Right.
as humans can understand each other, um, the more effective we can be on a global basis. And I think that's
Hmm.
a screaming opportunity for everybody. So the idea with cultural literacy is that while we're all humans, we're all very different in our likes, our dislikes, our thoughts, our behaviors, our cultures. So the more we can understand that and respect it and learn from it, and that's the key word, learning from each other,
Mm,
then the more successful we can be on a very localized basis because retail is a very local thing.
mm,
So if you translate that back into just the United States, there can be two stores in two different parts of town that have entirely different product assortment because the demographic is entirely different and the needs are entirely different.
Mm.
But with technology, you can modify the product assortment instead of having one size fits all
Mm.
to satisfy one part of town that may want churros and another part of town that would rather have scones.
Mm. Mm.
But if you put scones in all the stores, they're gonna never sell in one store and be out of stock in the other.
I love that, and hence the importance of your earlier point, which is data. Knowing what people are buying in different markets.